There are things we find, and there are things that find us. I never believed in coincidences. But that day, when a stranger appeared in my office with an antique locket in her hands and fear in her eyes, something changed. She didn't say everything, but her silence spoke volumes. It was as if that necklace carried more than history, it carried a calling. And against my instinct, I answered it. Some cases don't begin with a crime. They begin with an absence, a disappearance, a feeling that someone ceased to exist on purpose, not to escape, but to be found in another way. And that's exactly what captivated me in this investigation. The constant doubt between reality and illusion, between logic and something that defies all rational explanation. The kind of mystery that, once you delve into it, you don't come back the same. It wasn't just about a necklace. It was about hidden messages and symbols, voices that transcend time, family pacts, and a disappearance that seemed orchestrated by something greater. Each clue I followed led me deeper. And the more I discovered about Arthur Delacroix, the more I understood that I wasn't just solving a case. I was living it, from the inside, as a part of it. And before I open this file and show you everything I found, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching this from? Because it might sound crazy, but I've handled too many cases to ignore patterns. Maybe I've already been out there, investigating something you didn't even know was happening. I've never been one to be easily impressed. But on that rainy morning, when the doorbell rang at my office at 7:12, I sensed that I wasn't an ordinary client. The woman in front of me was trembling, even wrapped in an expensive coat. In her eyes, a silent despair. In her hand, an object wrapped in dark velvet, an antique, heavy reliquary, with a strange sheen too strong to be just gold. She could barely explain the reason for her visit. She just kept repeating that the necklace held a secret, and that her brother had disappeared days after touching it. The police? They had already filed it away as a voluntary escape. But something was wrong. The kind of wrong that you can't see, but you can feel, like a knot in your stomach that won't untie no matter what. I accepted the case more on intuition than logic. The woman seemed to be hiding something, not just about her brother, but about herself. When I said goodbye, she looked at me as if I were the last line of defense between her and the abyss. And the reliquary, well, it seemed more alive than an object should be, as if it were watching. I took the necklace with me and, for the first time in a long time, locked my office with an uneasy feeling in my back. This went beyond a disappearance. I could swear that, while driving back home, someone was following me. Or maybe it was just my mind switching back to hunter mode. After all, when the truth hides in symbols, it all starts with a good trail. I spent the whole night staring at the locket. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that clasp with a symbol I didn't immediately recognize, a kind of spiral inside a triangle. The next day, I took the piece to a trusted antique dealer downtown. Old Emilio greeted me with a frown even before opening the box. When he saw the necklace, he recoiled as if he'd seen a ghost. "This is something that should be buried," he said. He explained that the reliquary had been auctioned off in 1973, but reappeared years later during an investigation into a mass suicide in a village in rural France. A cursed artifact, according to rumors. But rumors, to me, are just curtains that cover what really matters. I asked for records, names, any document. Emilio hesitated, but ended up handing me a worn folder with old notes. Back in my office, I sifted through the papers until I found something that sent chills down my spine. The name of the family of the woman who had contacted me was there. They had tried to buy the necklace before its disappearance in 2003, another unsolved case. And even stranger, 3 previous owners vanished without a trace. It was as if the reliquary carried a pattern of tragedy, like a cycle that repeated itself from time to time. But why did it always come back? Who was bringing this object back to the surface? And for what reason? It wasn't just an old piece. It was a magnet for inexplicable events, an invitation to delve into a past that no one seemed willing to confront. But I was already too involved to back down. And the next morning, the first concrete indication of this pattern knocked on my door. His name was Arthur Delacroix. 34 years old, art restorer, solitary by choice. He disappeared one ordinary night, without a note, without signs of forced entry, without any unusual footprints. His sister told me that he had received the reliquary by mail, without a return address. 2 days later, he vanished. The police assumed he had fled, and the case died in bureaucracy. His apartment was untouched. Nothing out of place, except for a Polaroid on the refrigerator. In it, Arthur was smiling, but what caught my attention wasn't the smile. It was the reflection in the windowpane in the background. There was someone with him. Or something. I enlarged the image several times, and each time I looked, the figure became stranger. Humanoid, but distorted. As if time itself had erred in capturing it. Paranoid man. He swore that no one had entered or left that night. The cameras were curiously turned off, for maintenance. Too much of a coincidence. I returned to Arthur's apartment alone, after sunset. I wanted to feel the atmosphere. I did. There was something there. A density in the air, a silence that wasn't empty. It was observant. On his desk, I found a notebook. Most of it was scribbled, confused, but one phrase kept repeating itself. The reliquary is not an object. It's a key. A key for what? And why write it so many times, like a desperate mantra? Arthur was trying to decipher something. Something he may have deciphered. Too late. But it still remained to understand what, exactly, he had opened. Holding that reliquary for the first time was like touching a memory that wasn't mine. It was too cold for ordinary metal, too heavy for its size. The surface was riddled with micro-fissures, as if time had tried to destroy it but failed. When I turned the lid for the first time, I felt a dry crack, not mechanical, but organic. As if something had awakened inside. The inside of the reliquary seemed empty. But it wasn't. There was a dark residue at the bottom, a fine dust that didn't react to the light. I touched it with a matchstick and it recoiled, as if avoiding the heat. I can't explain it. It was like dealing with something that responded instinctively. But the strangest thing was realizing that, after closing it, my hand continued to tingle for minutes. And that wasn't psychological. I took the reliquary to an expert in religious artifacts. He analyzed it under a microscope and couldn't identify the metal alloy. He said there were esoteric symbols engraved on the inner edges, visible only with ultraviolet light. One of them looked like a distorted Greek letter. Another, well, it looked like a map. A fragment of a place that, to this day, no one has identified with certainty. But it seemed real. I returned to the office carrying more questions than answers. But one certainty hammered in my head, that reliquary wasn't decorative, nor symbolic. It was a tool. A device created to hide, guide, or imprison. And when the side fitting popped off the piece on its own, revealing an almost imperceptible crack, I realized it had layers. And I had only scratched the surface. It was on a sleepless night that I decided to look at the reliquary more closely. I took my blacklight flashlight and examined every inch of the object. That's when I noticed. A sequence of symbols appeared, as if emerging from the structure itself. They were 3 repeated characters, followed by a broken line, forming a kind of pattern. They looked like letters, but they weren't from any common language. I ran the images through my decoding software and compared them with Norse runes, Hebrew letters, and even Masonic cryptography. Nothing matched exactly, until I realized they weren't letters. They were directions. Like instructions for a mechanism, only encoded in a mixed language, designed to mislead. A sequence of specific movements. Like opening a safe that responds to logic and intuition at the same time. I followed the pattern on the base of the reliquary, and felt a click. An inner part shifted, revealing a hidden compartment that even the antique dealer didn't know about. Inside, a piece of paper with burn marks on the edges and a single handwritten sentence. Where mirrors refuse to reflect, the truth shows itself. Cryptic, direct, and disconcerting. Whoever wrote this wanted to be found, but not by just anyone. I stared at that note for minutes, as if expecting it to say more than it did. And in a way, it did. Mirrors that don't reflect? That reminded me of something Arthur had written in his notebook. Maybe it wasn't a metaphor. Maybe it was a place. A real place where the reflection fails, and secrets begin to emerge. I spoke to Arthur's sister again the following morning. This time, I wanted to observe more than listen. Gestures, pauses, the glances she tried to hide while speaking. And it didn't take long to realize, she was omitting something. She said her brother had been acting strangely before he disappeared, obsessed with the reliquary. But the way she said it, it sounded more like an accusation than concern. The entire family was surrounded by a strategic silence. The parents refused to give an interview, and the uncle, the only relative who agreed to talk, barely managed to maintain eye contact. Everyone spoke of Arthur in the past tense, as if he were already dead, or as if they wished he were. The sister, on the other hand, oscillated between fragility and control. Each of her sentences seemed rehearsed, like someone repeating a story they need to believe. I asked to see Arthur's personal belongings. She hesitated. Then she gave in, but only gave me generic books and old photos. Nothing recent, nothing revealing. That's when I realized someone wanted to limit my access to his true routine. Someone inside that house knew more than they were letting on. And when I touched a photograph in which Arthur appeared with a locket around his neck, weeks before the date given, it became clear they were lying about when it all began. The family, or part of it, was covering something up. The question was, out of fear or complicity? What if Arthur discovered something that compromised not only the necklace, but the blood that surrounded it? It was beginning to seem that the disappearance wasn't just a consequence of the reliquary. Perhaps it was a solution. A way to silence those who knew too much. His name was Victor Reese, Arthur's colleague at the restoration workshop. He was the only one, besides the family, who contacted me on his own initiative. He said he wanted to help in any way possible. He arrived with a friendly demeanor, a calm voice, almost too rehearsed. He spoke of Arthur like a brother, but avoided specific details. When I brought up the subject of the reliquary, he froze, as if the word carried too much weight. I insisted. I asked when was the last time he saw him. He answered too quickly, 2 days before he disappeared. The problem? This contradicted a security camera from the studio itself, which showed the two arguing in the parking lot the following day. When I confronted Victor, he backed down, stammered, and left with a, "I must be confusing the dates." But this type of mistake, in the middle of an investigation, is never innocent. I did what I always do with people like that. I let him talk. The more he talked, the more he revealed. He blurted out, "We knew messing with this was dangerous," without realizing it, and tried to correct himself immediately afterward. Arthur told me he was scared. The change in pronouns says a lot. Victor was involved, perhaps more than he would have liked. And he seemed to know exactly what the reliquary could cause, and where it could lead. I left that meeting with the impression that Victor wasn't just a witness. He was a key player. But I still didn't know if he was an accomplice, or just another victim of the traps set by that necklace. One thing was certain, though, he was lying. And liars, in my work, almost always carry truths that slip through the cracks. The next clue would come from a place Victor tried to hide, and failed. Deep inside an old box in the studio where Arthur and Victor worked, I found something no one had mentioned, a yellowed envelope, sealed with red wax and bearing a symbol identical to that of the reliquary. The paper was fragile, but the handwriting was still legible. It was a contract, or something resembling one. A pact made in 1986 between 4 signatures, all bearing the same surname, Arthur. The language was formal, almost ceremonial, and spoke of lifelong safekeeping of an ancestral secret. It wasn't a will, nor a recognizable legal document. It was something more intimate, more dangerous. Whoever signed it pledged to protect the reliquary, and keep its contents hidden. In exchange, nothing clear. Only the promise to keep the lineage in balance. This wasn't something ordinary people did. It was family symbolism mixed with mild occultism, the kind of thing that seems like a joke, until it isn't anymore. Linguistics professor who had helped me with other investigations. She confirmed the archaic style, but pointed out something strange. Certain words only made sense within a religious context that was forbidden in previous centuries. Something a cult would say. And in the footnote, very discreetly, there was a symbol that she immediately recognized. It was the seal of a defunct brotherhood in France, linked to historical disappearances of the 19th century. That changed everything. Arthur wasn't just playing at deciphering riddles. He was immersed in a legacy that had been passed down like a curse. What if he decided to break the pact, or reveal the secret? That would explain the disappearance. But it left an even darker question hanging in the air. How far would this brotherhood be willing to go to keep the reliquary silent? Arthur's notebook contained more than just disjointed phrases and strange symbols. There were numbers. Lots of numbers. At first glance, they looked like dates. Then I noticed a pattern. They were sequences of 3, repeated in vertical columns. June 18th, 09, December 18th, 36, 54-18-27. Always multiples of 9. I started testing combinations, sums, subtractions, coordinates, until I came across an identical code on the back of one of Arthur's childhood photos. The photo showed Arthur as a child holding a necklace very similar to the current locket. This confirmed 2 things. First, the object had been with the family for much longer than they said. Second, the dates were a cycle. A loop. The last number in the sequence matched exactly the day of the disappearance. Coincidence? Not in my world. I began to treat the sequences as a calendar, a secret clock, perhaps. With the help of a programmer, I created a chart based on the dates and places mentioned in the notebook. The result was a map with 3 central points: the studio, the Delacroix family's childhood home, and an abandoned convent in the countryside. Each location was linked to a disappearance in the family lineage. And in the center of the triangle, a symbol that matched the one on the contract I found. The pattern was more than mathematical. It was geographical. It wasn't just a coded message. It was a route. Arthur left a map, albeit unconsciously, of his own investigation. And if the dates were time windows, perhaps a new event was about to happen. A disappearance. A revelation. I needed to visit that convent before time ran out, literally. I returned to Arthur's house, but this time I entered with a different perspective. No longer as a visitor, but as someone about to confront a staged scene. The house was too clean. Every object seemed purposefully placed where it should be. But then the details begin. A lamp turned towards the wall, a crooked picture, a chair with a sawed-off leg, almost imperceptible. It was as if someone had tried to imitate normality, and failed. I went to the bedroom. The bed was made, but the bottom sheet had a strange crease, as if someone had hurriedly lain down there. I found circular marks on the wooden floor, as if an armchair had been dragged and put back. And the most curious thing, in the bathroom, the mirror was covered with black tape behind it, but only in the upper left corner. Nobody does that by accident. It was as if someone wanted to avoid a specific reflection. In the kitchen, I noticed an uncomfortable detail. The spice jars were labeled, in Latin. Who labels black pepper as piper? Nigrum. I picked one up. It was empty. At the bottom of the jar, folded like origami, was a small piece of paper with the word neuroma handwritten on it. A medical term. Neural tumor. But what if it wasn't literal? What if it was symbolic? Something about connections, networks, control. The house was a message. A mosaic of clues disguised as routine. And everything pointed to a detail that, until now, I had ignored. Arthur set up that scene not to mislead someone from the outside, but to alert someone from the inside. And maybe, just maybe, he knew I was coming. She cleaned the hallways of the building where Arthur lived. Almost invisible in the daily hustle and bustle, as is the case with most who wear a work uniform. Her name was Sonia, 62 years old, her eyes too attentive for someone feigning inattention. I struck up a conversation in the elevator. Just mentioning Arthur's name was enough for her to blurt out, "That young man with the necklace, right?" I feigned surprise. She already knew more about the case than any police officer. Sonia told me that, during the week of his disappearance, Arthur started coming downstairs with an envelope in his pocket and a nervous look on his face. One time, he dropped the contents without realizing it. She saw what was inside, a piece of broken mirror and a silver coin with a strange symbol. She tried to return it, but he only thanked her and said that it had to be kept away from the light. Strange words for such common objects, wouldn't you say? I asked if she told the police about it. She laughed. They didn't even want to know if I existed. Typically predictable. Sonia, however, remembered a detail that made my mind spin. The day before the disappearance, Arthur went downstairs with a locket around his neck, and came back without it. And the most curious thing, a lady dressed in black, whom no one in the building knew, left minutes later. She was never seen again. Sonia said that, since then, she felt the elevator stop on Arthur's floor by itself, even when it was empty. And one night, she swore she heard someone call her name from inside. I don't usually believe ghost stories. But that woman had nothing to gain by inventing this. And, deep down, I knew. When objects disappear, people appear. And vice versa. Rereading Victor's testimony, something started to bother me. He swore he last saw Arthur on a Wednesday at 6 p.m., leaving the studio. But on Arthur's cell phone, there was an audio message sent to him on Thursday at 9:17 a.m., in which Arthur thanked him for confidential material. The problem is that Victor claimed he hadn't had any further contact. I listened to the audio dozens of times. His voice was there. Soft, calculated, deceitful. I went to check the backup of Arthur's calendar, automatically saved in his email. There it was marked, "Meeting with VR, Thursday, 8:30 a.m., Café Aurora." The place had cameras. And luckily, the owner was the type who doesn't delete anything. I searched through the files and there they were, Arthur and Victor, sitting face to face. Tense conversation. Victor kept looking around, as if afraid of being recognized. It wasn't a casual meeting. This shattered the foundation of trust he was trying to build with me. Victor lied deliberately about our last contact. And what's more, he gave Arthur something he didn't want anyone to know. I enlarged the video. A brown envelope discreetly switched under the table. Arthur smiled, a strange smile, almost resigned. That was a farewell. Or perhaps a passing of the baton. What was in that envelope? Why did Victor lie about something so easily disproven? The only plausible explanation: the contents were too dangerous. And by handing it over, Victor crossed a line from which he could not return. Perhaps he knew this. Perhaps that's why he was so calm, or so terrified inside. I usually maintain an emotional distance from cases. Coldness saves lives, including my own. But in this one, something began to erode the neutrality that protected me. The more I dug, the more Arthur ceased to seem like a victim, and began to take shape as the perpetrator of something bigger. Not a common crime, but an experiment, a trigger. It was as if he had foreseen everything, including my arrival. And that unsettles any investigator, no matter how seasoned. I found a letter he had hidden inside a book on Greek mythology. It was addressed to no one. Or to everyone. It said, "If you are reading this, it's because the pieces have moved as I imagined. Be careful what you choose to understand. Not all knowledge is liberation." It was almost a message for me. With each line, I felt that Arthur wasn't lost, he was guiding. Not out of despair, but out of conviction. I began to question whether I was still investigating a disappearance, or participating in a meticulously orchestrated mind game. And what bothered me most was the motive. What did he want to prove? Or reveal? It started messing with my head in the small details. Insomnia, time lapses, a constant sense of déjà vu. It wasn't just the reliquary that was testing limits. I was being tested too. And that's where the dilemma comes in. How far is it worth going when the price is your own sanity? Arthur could be leading me to a point of no return. A point where logic gives way to something bigger, more abstract, and perhaps more true. But even so, there was one last line I wouldn't cross, unless he forced me to. I returned to the reliquary. There was still something about it that I hadn't deciphered. I turned it, disassembled it, observed it from angles I had never tried before. Until I realized, the inner lid wasn't fixed, it only seemed to be. All I had to do was press the two sides with perfect synchronicity and turn it in the opposite direction to the clasp. A light, dry snap confirmed it. A tiny compartment opened, the size of a coin. Inside, a piece of paper folded like origami, delicate, almost intact. I carefully unfolded it. The message was short, but composed of symbols, numbers, and gaps. Like a compact puzzle. I took it to my makeshift laboratory and began testing combinations. Nothing made sense, until I noticed the sequence of numbers. They were base 3. Ternary code. I converted them, and one by one, the words began to emerge. The complete sentence paralyzed me. What you seek is where sound does not propagate. At first, I thought it was too poetic. But it wasn't a metaphor, it was location. I tested environments with this characteristic until I arrived at a specific place. The underground room of an abandoned library, lined with lead and concrete, made to block signals and sounds. An old acoustic vault built in the 1960s during the Cold War. The connection to the message was clear. And if Arthur had been there, perhaps he would have left something more. That wasn't just a clue. It was an invitation. Or a challenge. The kind of thing a rational man would never follow. Unless he was ready to find something that would change everything. I took a deep breath, put the locket in my pocket, and went to the place. Inside, the silence was absolute. And in that silence, the next truth awaited. As soon as I entered that underground room, I was struck by a feeling I already knew. Not of the place itself, but of the atmosphere. That density in the air. The silence that pressed against my chest. The same feeling I had, years ago, in a disused orphanage in Lyon, during the investigation of a mass disappearance. A case that was shelved because the answers hit the wall of absurdity. At the time, I found symbols similar to those in the reliquary, but I never connected the dots, until now. I rummaged through my old files. Photos, notes, reports ignored by authorities who wanted to avoid panic. There they were, the same numerical patterns, the same cracked spiral with a triangle. And a recurring name among the inmates of that orphanage, Delacroix. A boy adopted by a French family, who disappeared at age 11 and was never found again. His file vanished from the official records. But I remembered his face. It was Arthur, younger. That hit me like a punch. The man who was now the focus of the investigation had disappeared before, decades ago, under a different name, with a different story. But the necklace was there too. It was as if he had escaped it once. And now he was trying to close the loop. Or prevent another one from starting. What if the key wasn't the locket, but his own existence? Perhaps Arthur was the secret, not its bearer. What was most disturbing was thinking that someone, or something, was ensuring that these patterns repeated themselves across different generations, different countries. And that Arthur had tried to break this cycle, leaving clues, symbols, and codes scattered throughout time. What else did he know? And how much of it was still buried in places I couldn't even imagine? I thought I was looking for Arthur. That he was the victim, the missing person, the central piece of this puzzle. But everything turned upside down when I found the video. Hidden on an encrypted hard drive, disguised inside a regular audio folder on the studio computer. The footage was homemade, uncut. Arthur was speaking directly to the camera. If you're seeing this, it's because you followed the clues to the end. Congratulations. Now, you need to decide what to do with the truth. He wasn't panicking. Nor was he fleeing. He was serene. Like someone carrying the weight of an inevitable revelation. He spoke of the reliquary as if it were a transmitter. Something created to activate memories, open inner portals, access dimensions that the human mind rejects by default. Disappearance is voluntary, he said. You have to disappear to see, to understand. And then, choose whether you want to return. Arthur didn't disappear. He disconnected. In a planned, meticulous, ritualistic way. And yet, he left everything to be found, by me. The revelation devastated me. I wasn't the pursuer of truth. I was the next player in the sequence. Arthur didn't want to be saved. He wanted to be succeeded. And now that I knew, carrying the reliquary was more than investigating a case. It was accepting a calling. And then comes the question that still lingers today. How many others followed the same path and disappeared without a trace? How many investigated too much, and ended up seeing what they shouldn't have? The video ends with a final phrase, "Don't trust the light. It deceives more than darkness." I paused. I repeated it. And I wondered if the next clue would be precisely where no one dared to look. I returned to the office after the video, but I couldn't think straight. Everything seemed real and, at the same time, meticulously staged. That's when I noticed something that had always been there, but I had never noticed before. The reliquary reacted to sound. Yes, to sound. A high-pitched buzzing sound appeared when I spoke certain words near it. I tested variations and discovered that it only activated with 3 specific phrases, all spoken by Arthur in the video. It was an enigma. A test. I made a recording of the sequence, using my own voice. The reliquary clicked, and an inner part retracted, revealing a mirror. Tiny, circular, with an opaque surface. I touched it. The mirror reflected nothing. Not my face, nor the room around me. It was like staring into nothingness, but with the distinct feeling that something on the other side was staring back at me. The object wasn't just there. It was me. Scanning. Measuring my response. My fear. On the side of the mirror, an inscription appeared in relief, as if drawn from within. "You are not where you think you are." And at that instant, I heard my own voice behind me, repeating the phrase. I turned around in a flash, but the room was empty. However, the recorder in the corner was on, even though I hadn't turned it on. The tape did contain my voice, but a recording I never made. With information I didn't yet know. It was the kind of trap that didn't rely on weapons or violence. It was mental. Psychological. Arthur built a labyrinth where the way out depended on losing one's sense of time, space, and identity. And the further I went, the more it seemed like I was inside his mind. Or worse, inside something that used his mind as an entry point. I followed the last hidden coordinate in the mirror's recording. An isolated point high in the mountains, where the cell phone signal dies and even the wind seems to hesitate. There, an abandoned chapel, covered in moss and symbols scratched into the marble. I entered prepared for anything, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. On the altar, lit with candles that shouldn't have been burning, was Victor. Seated, calm, as if he had been waiting for me. "It took you long enough, John," he said, without raising his eyes. He no longer seemed the same. His gaze had a different depth, a different pace. As if it carried too many voices to fit into a single mind. He admitted everything. He helped Arthur, passed on the reliquary, delivered the messages. But the most unsettling thing was the reason. He needed someone like you to complete the cycle, he said. Someone skeptical, methodical, vulnerable. I was chosen. Studied. Guided step by step to that point. The trap wasn't the enigma. It was myself. Victor stood up, opened one of the pages of the old book on the altar, and pointed to an illustration. It was the reliquary, drawn with precision, and below it, a hunched figure with covered eyes. The last piece is to see, without seeing. Before I could react, he placed the necklace in my hands. Either you close the cycle, or the cycle closes you. And then he left. Just like that. He disappeared among the cypress trees, without looking back. I stood there, alone, with the most insane decision of my life throbbing in the palm of my hand. The reliquary weighed like lead. I could destroy it, end it all. Or accept that the truth had already swallowed me whole. But before I could decide, the inner mirror activated itself. And the reflection I saw wasn't mine. What I saw in that mirror changed everything. It wasn't my image. It was a place, an endless corridor of identical doors, illuminated by a light with no source. At the far end, someone was walking backward, slowly. I tried to move, but my body froze. It was as if the reliquary had become a one-way window. Only I could see. Only I could feel. And in that instant, I understood. It wasn't made to hold anything. It was made to show. But to show what? The truth? The origin? A destiny? None of that. The reliquary is an instrument of transition. A catalyst between states of consciousness. A bridge. Not between places. Between levels of perception. Arthur didn't use it to escape. He used it to cross over. And the clues, the riddles, the traps, everything was a filter. To prevent anyone from passing. Only those willing to lose everything from their previous reality could see what came next. On the inner base, inscriptions appeared that weren't there before. You've come this far. Now choose. And 2 arrows, one pointing to the mirror, the other to a small crack with a wick of gunpowder. It was literal. Either you saw it, or it exploded. I confess, I trembled. I've always been driven by logic, by facts. But there, no logic made sense. Because the final question wasn't, what is this? But rather, do you want to know what comes next? I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. The reliquary pulsed like a racing heart. And that's when I realized, it was never a mystery to be solved. It was a test. A filter. An invitation. I had already accepted without realizing it. But the final decision was still mine. And time for it was running out. I don't remember exactly what I did in the following minutes. I only know that when I opened my eyes, the reliquary was closed again, and the mirror opaque. The chapel room seemed smaller, more stuffy. I tried to leave, but the door was ajar, as if it already knew I was leaving. The sky outside was dark, but it wasn't night. It was something different. Time seemed suspended, or perhaps only my perception of it. Something in me had changed. I returned to the city in silence, with the reliquary in my pocket and the feeling of having crossed an invisible border. I didn't tell the police anything, nor the press. I returned the necklace to the place where it all began, the concrete safe under the abandoned library. Closed, locked, forgotten. But even so, sometimes I feel it pulsing again, as if it were calling me, as if it still had more to show. Arthur never reappeared. Victor disappeared. And Arthur's sister? She received a letter with only one sentence. He is where the eyes cannot reach. I never found out who sent it. But I didn't need to. Because, deep down I knew. Some truths aren't meant to be shared. Only experienced. And even so, part of me feels that this story isn't over. That it has only fallen asleep. Even today, there are days when I wake up in the middle of the night with the feeling that the mirror has started watching me again. That there's still someone on the other side. Testing me. Waiting for me. Because when you get too close to the source of a mystery, it starts investigating you too. Some investigations end with evidence. Others, with confessions. But this one ended with a mirror that doesn't reflect. a necklace that holds silences, and a man who perhaps never wanted to be found. Arthur took me to the limits of logic, where everything I believed to be concrete began to crumble. And when you reach that point, the question stops being, what happened? And becomes, what am I after this? I saw what I didn't want to see. And perhaps you, who followed every step with me, also felt that. That there's something inside you waiting to be deciphered. A secret you yourself avoid looking at. The truth is, everyone carries an invisible reliquary. Memories, traumas, poorly explained decisions. And sometimes, all it takes to open it is someone with the courage to ask, are you ready to see what comes next? So think about it. What are you hiding inside yourself? What are you afraid to face? Because the answer may not come from the outside. It may be in a mirror you haven't yet had the courage to look at directly. And when that moment arrives, remember what happened here. Not every truth sets you free. But every lie costs more in the end. If this investigation captivated you, if it made you think differently, subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications. There's still a lot more to be told. And you can bet, the next story might be closer than you think.